Deep within a dense forest at the edge of Wuhan, China, the Wuhan Institute of Virology studied the world's deadliest pathogens, viruses that live in bats and caves, waiting for a chance to cross into human populations. Simultaneously, in the city's crowded wet markets, the blood of wild animals pooled on concrete floors. It was an environment where cross-species transmission was a statistical probability, offering a raw, chaotic contrast to the sterile labs nearby. While the exact origin point remained a subject of debate, the biological result was clear. This coronavirus had evolved to bind with human receptors, forcing its way inside our cells to begin replication. The virus utilized international flight paths to move faster than any localized response could contain. It traveled in the breath of unsuspecting passengers, crossing borders and reaching new continents before the world realized a pandemic had begun. By early 2020, the virus had successfully integrated itself into the very transit networks that connect the modern world, transforming a regional outbreak into a global, invisible presence. India recorded its first case on January 30, 2020. A student returning from Wuhan arrived in a country of 1.3 billion people, marking the point where the global crisis became a domestic reality. This chart compares the models run by the Indian Council of Medical Research. While a 40% reduction in infections was the safety target, projections showed a standard lockdown would only achieve a 20 to 25% drop, leaving a dangerous gap in defenses. To bridge that gap, the government launched a massive preemptive strike. They closed the skies and emptied the streets of cities like Mumbai, ordering over 1 billion people into the largest lockdown in human history. This wasn't a cure. Sealing to borders was a logistical stopgap, a trade of economic stability for a window of time to find a biological solution. Decades earlier, a different plan had already been set in motion on the rocky hills outside Hyderabad. In 1996, the Deccan Plateau was essentially a wilderness, an unlikely site for what would become a high-tech biomedical hub. Dr. Krishna Ella and his wife, Suchitra, left the United States to build an indigenous biotech company from scratch. They focused on affordable healthcare, eventually developing India's first locally produced hepatitis B vaccine. Ella's vision culminated in a biosafety level 3 laboratory, completed just as the pandemic began. It was designed for incurable airborne pathogens, requiring researchers to wear pressurized suits with an external air supply for absolute containment. Because Ella built a BSL-3 facility when many saw it as unnecessary, India possessed one of the few labs on Earth capable of handling the live virus for vaccine research. As the crisis intensified, Dr. Ella chose not to wait for vaccine recipes from Western pharmaceutical companies. He wanted an Indian solution designed for Indian conditions. He contacted the Indian Council of Medical Research with a specific request. He wanted their most dangerous asset, the live SARS-CoV-2 virus, transferred to his private laboratory in Genome Valley. The government agreed. In May 2020, the live virus strain was prepared at the National Institute of Virology in Pune and transported across a lockdown country to Hyderabad. Having the virus in-house moved the project from observation to action. The national crisis had been distilled into a specific engineering problem within the lab's walls. Inside the BSL-3 facility, the team worked in isolation. With national supply chains broken, scientists spent months in heavy containment suits, managing the grueling logistics of virus cultivation under lockdown. This comparison shows the strategic choice they made. While vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna required a massive overhaul of ultra-cold logistics to reach -70 degrees, Ella's team engineered a vaccine for the world as it actually exists. They used a whole virion platform. The live virus is chemically inactivated, effectively killed, leaving a safe, dormant shell that teaches the immune system how to recognize and fight the real pathogen. This resulted in Covaxin, India's first indigenous vaccine. Because it is inactivated, it can be stored in a standard refrigerator, making it accessible to regions without high-tech cold chains. Success depended on a design built for existing infrastructure. By prioritizing stability over high-tech fragility, Bharat Biotech created a tool that could be deployed across the entire subcontinent. In just 90 days, the team in Hyderabad had forged a viable vaccine candidate from scratch. However, moving from a controlled lab to a national rollout meant facing new challenges. a scientific community, and a public that demanded absolute proof under the pressure of a rising death toll. The factory in the jungle had successfully produced a weapon, but the struggle to win public trust and protect a nation was only beginning. In the first week of January 2021, the Indian government made a decision that immediately split the country down the middle. The Drug Controller General granted emergency use approval to the domestically developed Covaxin while it was still in clinical trial mode. Phase 3 trials, the critical stage designed to prove a drug's efficacy on tens of thousands of people, had not yet been completed. Without the underlying data released to the public, doctors and virologists were entirely baffled. The scientific skepticism quickly morphed into a political attack. The main opposition party led a chorus of doubt, demanding to see the raw numbers. Leaders like Congress MP Shashi Tharoor openly accused the government of rushing the approval, putting citizens' lives at risk to score political points. Then the corporate rivalry spilled into the open. The CEO of the Serum Institute of India, which manufactured the rival Covishield formula, went on national television and stated that globally, only 3 vaccines had proven their worth. The others, he implied, were merely safe like water. The implication that Covaxin was essentially water stung the researchers at Bharat Biotech. Dr. Krishna Ella, the lead scientist who had given up his American citizenship to build an indigenous biotech industry, took it personally. He called a press conference the next day, his voice thick with frustration, asking the media, "We work 24 hours. Do we deserve this bashing?" The fallout escaped the news cycle and hit the ground. States like Chhattisgarh and territories like Chandigarh publicly expressed mistrust of the indigenous jab. Health ministers declared it unsafe to deploy, turning standard medical hesitancy into active political hostility. With scientists, politicians, and corporate rivals fighting in public, the immediate casualty was public confidence. In the middle of a pandemic, vaccination centers sat empty. Bharat Biotech responded to the rhetoric with raw numbers. Their teams ran near-continuous analyses, parsing results from 25 trial centers and thousands of human volunteers across India, including participants in their early 90s. On March 3, 2021, Phase 3 data proved Covaxin achieved an 81% efficacy against symptomatic COVID-19. This outperformed the 62% efficacy of rival Covishield. The formula dismissed as water was actually an exceptionally strong, robust defense against the virus. When Dr. Ella presented these findings, the data validated his laboratory's strict protocols. It completely reversed the national mood, rebuilding trust in the country's domestic manufacturing at exactly the right time. Securing the supply at home and proving its safety was the first, strictly necessary step. With millions of effective doses coming off the production lines, India was suddenly in a position to attempt something massive on the global stage. The Ministry of External Affairs mobilized this new domestic capacity by launching Vaccine Maitri, vaccine friendship. The policy was rooted in a Sanskrit prayer from the Upanishads, Sarv Santu Niramaya, may all be free from disease. Air India cargo planes immediately began taking off. 1 million doses landed in Nepal, while another 1.5 million crossed the border into Myanmar. The logistics chain stretched further to reach geographically isolated nations. Consignments of life-saving vials touched down in the Maldives, Mauritius, and the Seychelles, nations the international community frequently ignored. If we map these export routes, the sheer scale of the operation becomes visible. By mid-February, those supply lines had delivered nearly 23 million doses globally. Eventually, the shipments reached over 70 different countries. These deliveries were primarily gifts. While India was battling its own severe internal crisis, it systematically deployed its domestic biomedical production to shield vulnerable populations abroad. This outward distribution happened at the exact moment wealthy countries were moving in the opposite direction. Western superpowers had used their deep pockets to pre-book and capture the global vaccine supply. This split-screen chart illustrates the global imbalance. On the left, wealthy nations representing less than 20% of the world's population hoarded over 60% of all available vaccines. On the right, low-income nations had managed to administer exactly 25 doses, total. The Director General of the World Health Organization publicly condemned this extreme stockpiling, warning the world was on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure. India bypassed this ethical failure because it had baked strategic autonomy into its scientific approach. By engineering Covaxin to survive in standard refrigerators and controlling the intellectual property internally, Bharat Biotech ensured the formula could be manufactured at immense scale and exported without foreign corporate interference. Because the expensive mRNA formulas from the West required extreme cold storage and prioritized domestic booster shots, they struggled to reach the developing world. India's domestic supply chain stepped into that void, supplying the primary doses for vaccination campaigns across nearly 100 countries. In a global panic, the wealthiest nations retreated to their own borders. By transforming its factory in the jungle into a global supply chain, India demonstrated that self-reliance can become a nation's most effective diplomatic tool. Leadership was ultimately measured by the will to supply the world when others would not.